Before we get started, hey there, I'm Jason Linett, and maybe you've heard me say this before. The more we're all successful, the more we're all successful. And the one thing that will grow our hypnosis profession better than anything else is to have more of you out there helping your own clients and thriving in your own hypnosis businesses. That's why I'm inviting you to join our private community, exclusively for listeners of the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast. We have several thousand members in the group, and this is where recent guests of the program share additional resources related to their episode. It's a positive community with hypnotic professionals from all around the world. So it's a great place to get your questions answered. And as a benefit, as soon as you join, I'm going to share with you the best of the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast archives. And listen to this. It's absolutely free to join. Go to this website, group.worksmarthypnosis.com. Go there right now, answer a few quick questions, and I'll personally be there to welcome you into this helpful community. Be sure to join today. That website is group.worksmarthypnosis.com. Hey, the client writes the script for you, and then they go off and do whatever pre-designed system and strict protocol they learned. With this, by asking the question, what is that going to do for you? Your client literally writes the script for you. What's that going to do for you? Let's use the example I've been using as the premise so far. What's that going to do for you? Oh, well then I'm going to be much more confident so I can actually focus now on making sure the audience is engaged with my presentation and also having a good time because I know that's going to help them implement what I'm there to share with them. That's amazing. Hypnosis helps people take back control of their lives. But here's the thing. Too many hypnotists struggle to get consistent results with their clients or grow their hypnosis businesses. I'm Jason Linett, and after more than 2 decades of building a thriving hypnosis practice, I created this podcast to help you do the same. Whether you're just starting your hypnosis journey or if you're ready to scale your business to the next level, you're exactly where you need to be. Welcome to Work Smart Hypnosis. Here's how you can maximize your client results immediately. Hey there, it's Jason, and this week on our Make It Rain edition of the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, where every Monday I come on and I share something specific to help you to grow your business in a rapid-fire session. Now, before we dive into it, though, I will tell you, on the surface level of this, you might think what I'm about to share, well, that's not exactly business, Jason. That's actually something you would do inside of your sessions. And you know what? You're right. However, the better results you get with your clients, that's going to help you to grow your business. And this is one strategy that I'll tell you the story around that here in a moment, that I finally finessed and made it my own and put it into my client work. And as a result of it, I was getting much more impact in my sessions and focusing the journey on the right turning points in a better way. And as a result, it's how most of the business that I now do in terms of client sessions as a hypnotist is coming in either by way of referral or as a result of reviews that can be found online. So yes, this Make It Rain Monday is specifically something to do in your client sessions. However, better results are going to help you to better grow your business, quite obviously. Now, I know this is a rather bold promise I'm about to make you, but I'll tell it from my perspective, though, which was that as soon as I put this into my work, the results came much more easily. Any moments of potential problematic clients, they actually began to go away. And even better, if there were ever things that I taught to a client, like a technique or a method, something amazing happened. They actually began to do the things that I was sharing with them. And I'm going to give full credit in terms of the origin, or really the inspiration of this, which is that the basis of what I'm about to share with you came from Michael Ellner. Now, Michael was somebody who we sadly lost a number of years ago. And to really point to Michael's legacy and my work, the first ever interview that I recorded and released on this Work Smart Hypnosis podcast series, all the way back to 2014, the first interview was with Michael Ellner. And if you go to the show notes of this week's episode, this is session number 448. So go to worksmarthypnosis.com/448. That'll bring you over to the show notes of this week's episode. And inside of there, we'll also link to the resources about the previous interview with Michael Ellner. So I think of Michael for this And this is a worthy side note that I'll mention here real quick. In the hypnosis industry, there's this ongoing conflict or dialogue, or however you want to frame it, about how do you measure the quality of a training program. And for some organizations, they've answered that based upon the number of hours, such as this program is 100 hours, this program is 300 hours, this one's 1,000 hours. Here's my yeah, but to that dialogue, though. It's the fact that, well, I think back to Michael Ellner. And the first time in person I had a conversation with him, it had to have been no more than 20 or 30 minutes. And it changed the entire approach as to how I do hypnosis. So that's part of the legacy that he had on me. And one part of it is the foundation of the strategy that I'm about to share. In this opening segment, I'm going to walk you through what his version of it was. And then in the next part of this, I'm going to walk you through kind of what I've added to it over time based upon some principles that I'll highlight along the way. So with Michael, it's important to know that he worked quite frequently with people involving pain relief or even catastrophic illness. And basically, he would give his client a menu. Metaphorically speaking, he wouldn't hand them a sheet of paper and go, which one do you want? No, instead, what he would say is, based upon this issue involving pain, and this is a paraphrase, obviously, for this pain issue, there's kind of two directions we could go. Option one is to directly address that feeling, that signal that tells you that you're uncomfortable. And almost like a dimmer switch, we can kind of go in and then dial that down so that now you have much more control over it and it doesn't have to become the predominant focus of your day. That's one pathway we can go. The other pathway is that you mentioned that this often flares up in issues of stress and conflict. So rather than go after the actual feeling itself, let's kind of just take all the levels of stress in your life down so that now really there's nothing to kind of aggravate this thing that you're currently under medical care to supervise. You know your situation better than I would. Which one of those two do you think would be the best fit to help you out? And that's basically the structure of the Michael Ellner, it never had a name, I'm going to call it the Ellner menu method. Let's go with that. And the result of this was kind of magical because the client would then respond, I think this one. And as soon as that occurred, from a hypnotic standpoint, something magical has occurred. You now have a hypnotic contract. This person is now telling you, hey, that's going to work for me. And as a result of that, you're now going into the session, and not just you, but also the client has a sense of confidence and even conviction that this is going to help me. And that's the basis of where we're about to go. However, stick around here because I'm going to share with you some variations and a really interesting spin on this inside of this week's episode, because this is something that I was doing, not all the time, but around 2017, around 2018, I revisited this. And as a result of it, I kind of made some adjustments to it based upon things that I figured out by selling high-value programs, private consulting services, website build-out projects, things that I've done with people anywhere from, $3,000 or $4,000, and for some projects that are big and expansive, and sometimes often in other industries, as high as $42,000 was one of the bigger ones there. So I mention this here because yes, everything is sales. Everything is sales, even the work that we're doing inside of our client sessions. So I took some high-ticket selling principles and I brought that over inside of the hypnotherapeutic change journey. And as a result of that, just amplified the results, maximized my client sessions. So keep this in mind. Even if you are telling yourself, I'm not a marketing person, I'm not a salesperson. Yes, you are, because everything is sales. You're always selling an idea. You're always selling the next step. Let me also point out one other reference here, and we'll link to the episodes with her in the show notes, worksmarthypnosis.com/448, Jess Marion, because there's a time that I read in one of Jess Marion's books that describing the technique is also doing the technique. And that's going to be part of the nuance and the walkthrough of the method I'm about to share with you, which if you want more like this, what I've classically found is that the strategies that we would focus on in our client work, it's not just the methods that we use to help our clients. It's also the way that we customize the techniques in real time to step away from rigid protocols, to step away from the dependency upon scripts, and how really we just need systems for persuasive change inside of our hypnotic change process. Which, if that's something you want some help doing, this is why I do my Work Smart Hypnosis Live event. You can check out the details over at live.worksmarthypnosis.com. We've always got one of these events right around the corner. It's not just the education and the training, it's also real-time practice as well as breaking down these persuasive principles so that then helping you to get maximized results with your clients becomes a whole lot easier. We get people who coming into the class who some of them are brand new and just getting started, but we also have many of you who are already trained and looking to sharpen these methods even better and just get greater, more consistent results. So with that, check out live.worksmarthypnosis.com and let's dive in. This is session number 448, maximize your client results immediately. Let's dive directly. Has your hypnosis client ever said this to you? I felt relaxed, but I don't know if I was hypnotized. If you've heard that before, it means that one of the most critical elements was missing from your hypnosis session. You might have done every hypnosis technique and every hypnotherapy method correctly, but you've accidentally sabotaged your chances of your client getting their desired result. Here's the good news. It's an easy problem to fix. Check out this website, power.worksmarthypnosis.com. This is where you can get instant access to my Hypnotic Phenomenon Power Pack featuring the Hypnotize with Conviction program. It's a foolproof system to reliably create magical moments of hypnotic phenomenon with all of your clients, whether you see them in person or even online. What this does for you is help to build greater conviction that the desired change is already in motion. And even better, it means that your client will be able to actually feel the change taking place. How cool is that? It's these types of magical moments that helped my clients to become the people who sent me referrals and left me 5-star reviews. And I'm inviting you to grab this low-cost method that you can learn today and put to use with your next client. So go to power.worksmarthypnosis.com. In because I'm going to give you the 5 bullet points that make up this process right away. It's 5 simple things. They're either questions or statements. And as a quick reminder, worksmarthypnosis.com/448 on the show notes for this episode, we're going to put these 5 bullet points big and bold. That way you can't miss them. So here they are. Point number 1, you mentioned X. Point number 2, that's why we're going to A so that B. These are templates. You're going to fill them in. I'll explain it here in a moment. Point number 3, does that make sense? It's a question. Point number 4, any questions on that? Point number 5, what is that going to do for you? So I'm going to go through it in order, this time not referencing the bullet point numbers. You mentioned X. That's why we're going to A so that B. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? What is that going to do for you? And again, this was modeled after things I figured out in terms of how to communicate differently so that the value of my private services and web projects was then very clear, and that way then it commanded much higher fees. So this has a foundation in high-ticket selling. However, we're going to pull this now into our client work. So let me walk you through the steps of this here. You mentioned X. Now, this is where I would openly tell everybody the quality of the change process that you do with your client is directly proportionate to the quality of the questions and things you learn inside of your intake part of the journey. So if your intake is kind of all surface level and isn't quite diving deeper into the right things, that's where this is going to suffer. So this week on Make It Rain Monday, it's just about this strategy. So if you want more on intake strategies, that's why I mentioned live.worksmarthypnosis.com. Simply put, in the first point, bring up something that they've already talked to you about. You mentioned that when you're about to go speak for an event at work, you get nervous because your administrators and your bosses are then watching you. So I'm basically going to feed back something that I've already learned that satisfies point number 1 here. You mentioned that you're nervous when you're speaking in front of supervisors. There's a simpler version of what I just said. Here comes point number 2. That's why we're going to A so that B. Now, if I had to give you this in a more of a template model, that's why we're going to insert description of technique here so that specific desired outcome here. I know it's easier to say on the podcast as a recording. That's why we're going to A so that B. So that's why we're going to technique so that outcome. That's basically what the formula is. Now, keep listening here, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see hypnotists make, and this is more so on their marketing and promotion side of things, is that you and I are used to sharing all the technical jargon of hypnosis. You and I are used to talking about all the various methods that we all love and are excited about, and yet that is not important to your client, at least not yet. They don't need to know the terminology. They don't need to hear hypnotic age regression to cause, and then informed child, and then rebuilding and reintegration of the change. That's a lot of words. Instead, we're going to talk about it in a way that's more in their language. And again, I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples of this. We're going to do this so that you can finally let go of that fear. We're going to do thing so that you can create confidence that overrides that old feeling of fear. So there's point number 2. So far, where are we? You mentioned problem. That's why we're going to technique so that outcome. That's the meat of this. That's the part that you, as the practitioner, are going to direct in real time. Now comes the interaction. Does that make sense? Which, by the way, is a beautiful, beautiful little piece of ambiguous language. I'm not saying, does that sound good? Because that's auditory. I'm not saying, do you feel me? Not that I would say that, but that's kinesthetic. I'm not saying, can you see what that would look like? No, I'm asking, does that make sense? Gorgeously ambiguous, use it. It's that powerful. So we're getting comprehension buy-in from this third point. Does that make sense? Now, the whole reason that that's there is we're looking for logic first. Does that make sense? And again, this is part of how I transition out of the intake and then into the actual client session. I really use the question, does that make sense, as a springboard into the second question here. Any questions on that? Now, this is where they might have some questions. This is where they might, in that moment, just simply, in the majority of them, go, no, makes sense. So this is where, again, depending on how well you described what the technique journey would be from the user experience from their side, this is how usually it just plays out. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any questions on that? No, makes sense. But here is the magic part. The most magical part of this is the final question. What is that going to do for you? Now, this is where be ready to write down whatever they give you. Be ready to take notes on whatever they're about to share with you, because a lot of hypnotists say this next statement and hold back people who are like, oh, he said scripts. Oh, he said the S word. Bad, bad. Let me repeat the things that everybody else on the internet says. No, calm down. Okay, enough already. Richard Nongard nailed it with the whole statement. He goes, people who say scripts are bad are either one of three things. One, not actually seeing clients and just repeating popular statements. Therefore, it's someone else's philosophy they're repeating. It's an unqualified position. Thing number two, they're actually using them and lying. Thing number three, they may not be using an actual piece of paper. However, there's certain routine moments, let's put it that way, in your process. And that's where, when this scenario pops up, you say something similar, and it could have been scripted. It may be documented as, like, for magicians, they call it the patter, but really it's a rote piece of language that you consistently use. So set aside the script thing. But enough people do say, hey, the client writes the script for you, and then they go off and do whatever pre-designed system and strict protocol they learned. With this, by asking the question, what is that going to do for you? Your client literally writes the script for you. What's that going to do for you? Let's use the example I've been using as the premise so far. What's that going to do for you? Oh, well then I'm going to be much more confident, so I can actually focus now on making sure the audience is engaged with my presentation and also having a good time, because I know that's going to help them implement what I'm there to share with them. That's amazing. That's something that now I know what the result after the result is meant to be. Do you see how now this client session is no longer make public speaking suck less? And instead now it's transformed into a place of performance enhancement. Now, really, that's the formula. And I'm going to do a little bit of devil's advocate stuff here. And I'm going to be a little appropriately stubborn and arrogant for your benefit here, because some of you might be listening to this and thinking, yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about that? And you're allowed to do that. Go right ahead. I'm also allowed to respond to those yeah, but narratives with the proof and the evidence that I've now done this for about this specific strategy, counting on at least about 1,200 plus clients. So you might be going, what if they say, I don't think that's going to work for me? And I can now comfortably tell you, I've only had 2 instances of that. So relax. It's likely not going to happen. Now, for the first person of this example, I just simply re-described the method another way, and he goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So it was on me. I could have phrased it better. The second person, and you might run into this here, it's not that the client is resistant. It's more that they've been beat down by the internal story of try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, that it's hard for them to buy into the idea that an alternate reality of this being easy and resolved is possible. You know, they were in the narrative as to, I'm always going to be struggling with anxiety, as opposed to, oh, it doesn't have to rule my life anymore. I had to kind of baby step this journey and get that belief system in place first. And that's not resistance. That's not pushing back. That's not problematic, or I'm not at threshold yet. No, that's just a matter of working on the client's belief structure. So one more time, the formula. You mentioned X. That's why we're going to A so that B. Let me say that again a different way. You mentioned problematic situation. That's why we're going to description of technique so that desired outcome. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? What is that going to do for you? So before we round this out here, let me walk through a couple of examples here. You mentioned that being around other people that smoke is a potential challenge and concern of yours. That's why we're going to do something in the process today to almost metaphorically go inside and disconnect the cigarettes from all of those associations you've created in your life, so that now never again is there a situation where it's logical in any way to reach for the cigarette. It's just going to be so disconnected from all those old situations entirely. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? What is that going to do for you? Which, if you're curious, oh, this would be fun if we were doing this in person as a game. Guess what technique that was? That was some variation of something we can do in a control room metaphor. Here's another one. You mentioned whenever you start to get comfortable in a new relationship, you traditionally have begun to self-sabotage and inadvertently end the relationship. That's why we're going to go inside of that feeling of comfort and kind of isolate where some of that doubt and fear is coming from. And whatever that story was that's motivating that fear, we're going to release that story completely so that now, whatever you've been through in the past becomes every reason why, when the relationship is right, you actually can enjoy being in that relationship. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? What is that going to do for you? And yeah, go back and rewind everything I just said, because doesn't that sound a whole lot more appropriate to say to your client rather than, I'm an expert at hypnotic age regression. I have 4 certifications in hypnotic regression, and we're going to use that today. No. And it's not that I'm hiding the technique. It's instead, though, I'm talking about it in a way that's important to them. And also, I'll put this out there. I did remove the this or that part of the menu from the original Michael Elner inspiration of this, partly because it's only in the later years that I reached back out to Michael and I went, hey, what if they say the one technique? What about the other? And he goes, eventually I end up doing both. It's a matter of which one's the priority. And I will say, the more confident you become in your work, the more that you realize, and this is part of the change system that I'm training inside of live.worksmarthypnosis.com, where the client doesn't realize it, but they're speaking in code. And whatever they're saying, you're going to have the ability to match that up to specific techniques that you've got. One more before we wrap this up here. You mentioned that nail biting has been the challenge. That's why we're going to go into the parts of your mind that are holding on to the idea that this is a challenge and just make it seem so completely ridiculous that it just wouldn't make sense to ever put your fingers in your mouth with the intention to harm ever again. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? What's that going to do for you? And if you're curious, that's actually a way that you can adapt the fast phobia cure, the fast phobia release, to then use that as a mechanism to then just completely make another behavior absolutely ridiculous. So you've got what you need in terms of bridging the gap from the intake into the client session. And basically, I am running every technique twice now. And as a result of this, you're able to go into your session with absolute conviction that, yes, this is going to work. And the client has that too. If you want more strategies on what the actual change processes are, how to do that intake in a stronger way, how to build systems that allow you to be flexible in real time with your client sessions, that's why I do the Work Smart Hypnosis live event. Check it out at live.worksmarthypnosis.com. Thank you for listening to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast with Jason Linett. The more we're all successful, the more we're all successful. I've made that statement for years. It's why I do this show. And here is one thing that you can do today to help do your part. Go to worksmarthypnosis.com/podcast. Go there and make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform. And if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd leave a review. Your feedback helps other hypnosis professionals find the show. Subscribe and share your thoughts today at worksmarthypnosis.com/podcast.